Published in 1985, Saboteur became an instant smash for its publisher, Dural Software. At many of the larger software houses, team-based video game development was flourishing. Saboteur was the work of principally just one person, programmer Clive Townsend. My introduction to computers was when a friend of mine bought a ZX81, he tells Antstream Arcade. Between us, we took turns to read and type in listings from magazines. As was common, these programs often failed, either due to printing or typing errors. Clive and his friend were forced to examine their code and locate the bugs. Perhaps without the bugs I would never have become intrigued by the behind-the-scenes of how games actually worked, he ponders. Having begun saving up for his own ZX81, Clive was tempted by an even better computer, which he still quaintly calls the ZX82. It looked so much better, and with the help of family I was able to afford one when it was finally released. Clive's first effort on what would become the ZX Spectrum was a tarot card program. It was very simple, but it taught me the logic of game loops and how to draw graphics on a specky screen. My graphics were mostly monochrome, but that turned out to be helpful for ninja games. Having made contact with local games publisher Dural, there was just one small barrier between Clive and his potential games programming career: he had to finish school. But Dural promised me a job when I left, and it was my first real job. In charge of the Somerset-based company was Robert White. Robert was a great boss, and Dural was a great place to work, remembers Clive. Clive's first task at Dural was to convert the ill-fated Commodore 64 game Death Pit to the Spectrum. But the young man had already begun developing an idea of his own, working on it outside office hours, and his inspiration had come from the martial arts. I did judo and karate as a kid, but each seemed very limited, at least to a beginner. Then I discovered ninjutsu, which seemed to combine other martial arts and also weapons training. This being the 80s, ninjas were everywhere in popular culture, and as he was also a fan of James Bond, Clive's plan was to combine the two elements, a ninja in a Bond-style environment. When Robert White saw an early version of what would become Saboteur, he ordered his employee to abandon Death Pit and focus on his ninja game. In Saboteur, the player assumes the role of a deadly mercenary, trained in the martial arts and employed to infiltrate an enemy building. Somewhere inside this cavernous warehouse is a disk containing the names of all the rebel leaders. Your job is to purloin the disk before escaping via the helicopter situated on the roof of the building. Guards and attack dogs patrol the huge warehouse, and with the mercenary up against the clock, this is no easy mission. Creating a massive, open-world and scrolling game wasn't easy either, as Clive was quickly discovering. I was generally trusted to get on with the project without much input from Dural. He explains. But there was one major problem: I was scrolling most of the screen, and it wasn't fast enough. It was Dural's boss who suggested that Clive turn Saboteur into a flip-screen game, thus solving all of his speed issues. Yet despite this change, it remained an ambitious project for the 48K Spectrum. I had such plans, bemoans Clive. But it turns out everything costs memory, and there's a limited budget. I knew roughly what I wanted to do, but couldn't really judge how much space everything would take. I came up with a code to create rooms, draw a rectangle here, add a barrel there, and this compressed the maps into a small amount of bytes, yet kept just enough detail. Fortunately, with the game's star dressed in black, color clash was largely avoided, and Clive aimed for as much realism as possible. Maybe a bit of sci-fi or fantasy at times, but mostly realistic, he says. I chose a scale of 8 pixels equals 1 foot, so my ninja was about 6 foot tall. Crafting such a large and complex game was painstaking, as Clive explains. To create the original code, I would load an assembler and some source code into the Spectrum, then save the assembled code to tape. Then I would load in all my bits of code and graphics to test the game before noting down any bugs and loading the assembler and source code again. It was such a slow process. Additional gameplay elements, such as the regenerating health counter, added to Saboteur's innovative design. It was another aspect of Clive's drive towards realism. It just seemed realistic to get your breath back if you stopped for a moment, and I discovered that there was a nice trade-off with energy and time. Saboteur's continually ticking clock gave the player a stark choice. Do you waste time replenishing your health or take the risk of venturing out with low energy? Saboteur is a tough game, but for those persistent and skilled gamers who actually managed to grab the disc and make it to the roof, there was a nice graphical reward at the end of Saboteur. Fortunately, I didn't leave that until the end, reveals Clive. Both the dingy intro and the end sequence were added when the game was half finished, so I wasn't thinking about memory at that point. As capacity became tight, Clive simplified some of the rooms, recognizing the importance of being able to retain his two impressive set pieces. Clive has been quoted as saying that Saboteur took him 5 months, although today he feels it was probably closer to 12 once you factor in the work he did at home. His hard work was rewarded when the game received universal praise in the magazines of the time, including a coveted Crash Smash. This was the pre-internet days, so the majority of feedback was from magazines, he says. And on top of that, Dural were sent fan letters saying how much they loved the game. I was very chuffed. The player is set in the role of an anonymous ninja, tasked with getting into a warehouse to steal a floppy disk which has the names of rebel leaders on it. The player must navigate through the complex of rooms, consisting of the warehouse, dark tunnels and the secret command center, to find the disk and escape. The player has an energy bar which is depleted by falling too far, crouching underwater or being attacked. If the energy bar is completely depleted or if time runs out, the game ends. The bar can be replenished by standing still and resting in a safe area. The Saboteur can crouch, climb ladders, run and attack enemies by punching and drop-kicking them. He begins with a single shuriken as a weapon and can also utilize improvised weapons, such as bricks and pieces of pipe, found in rubbish piles and boxes around the warehouse. The warehouse contains many security systems the player will need to defeat or avoid. These include guards, who can use hand-to-hand combat and guns, who stand still and will chase and attack the Saboteur if they see him or if he makes too much sound. The guards are assisted by guard dogs and automatic gun emplacements. Saboteur also has a difficulty level selection that can be chosen before a game begins. The chosen difficulty level determines how many guards are on watch, how much time the Saboteur has to complete his mission, and how easy the route to the disc and helicopter will be, i.e. how many security doors on the way are locked and will need to be opened in some way. Crash noted the sound, and the range of movements available, and concluded it is one of the better releases on the spectrum this year. C+VG said it was a winner. The game was also voted number 55 in the Sinclair official Top 100 Games of All Time.